So I'm glad you're here, and we're in this part 2 of Win the Day. Yesterday is history. Tomorrow is a what? It's a mystery. And why this is so important is so many of us get so paralyzed, by our past, about the fear of our past and kind of where it's led us a little bit, and that, God could never use us, or, if I'm divorced, or if I go through certain things. And it's learning that you just need to live in the day. And we're going to talk about that more today, how to kiss a wave, if you've never kissed a wave before. And but even with the future, that's where I think a lot more anxiety is for myself and for others, is really the uncertainty. And that just happened to some people right here in town when it comes to vocation and jobs right here in Bloomington Normal with State Farm. And so part of it is, how do you get through this life? How do you win this day? Today, we're going to talk about Kiss the Wave. And what we talked about last week, just to give you a real quick synopsis from last week, if you weren't here, is this: it's a whole biblical concept of simply living in the day and winning in the day. That's how you kind of learn from your past and you kind of go forward in your future. It's a biblical concept. It's always been there, okay? Something I've been learning myself for these last few years is this whole idea of teach us to number our days that we might gain a heart of wisdom. Again, so many of us live in the past, or so many of us are living and anticipating an uncertain future that we don't realize that we become paralyzed, or we become filled with anxiety or depression. And that's why this is such an important series. And it's interesting is this has always been there. Verses that kind of taught us, that his faithfulness is new every morning. Don't let the sun go down on your anger. It's a day. Give us this day our daily what? Bread. And I'm guilty of this, and I'm sure you are too. And what's happened to me a little bit over these last few years as God's doing some stuff in me is I've been kind of living this out and not realizing I was living this out until I came across this book about 6-8 months ago, and I read it. It's called Win the Day by Mark Batterson. I'm going to encourage you to get it. And I think it's a fantastic book. He's kind of like a spaz like I am, but there's just some great stuff in there. And it helped me to understand that's what I've been doing. That's why I'm so excited about this personally. And so another way of saying it is our job then, this is kind of the overall 36,000 foot kind of perspective. Our job then is to just simply give ourselves over to God day in and day out. And again, we do that, God's going to show up. And dare I say, he might even show off a little bit with you. And so last week, if you weren't here, and I encourage you, you can go to, I like the app a lot. A lot of you have downloaded the app, or if you haven't listened to the message, and I listened to it again, and that's a really hard thing to do, to watch yourself on video. It's really hard. But I wanted to make sure I communicated the right things when I was hoping to communicate. But really what I was trying to get to high level was if you want to change your life, you have to change your story. And part of it where we kind of camped, I camped in this for a while, is this whole idea that most of us the person that you talk to most in your life is whom again? Yourself. It's yourself. And scientists are finding, this is why I love where science and truth, biblical truth come together. What science is finding out is that more and more of us are talking more and more negatively to ourselves. I know that's exactly where I've been for these last couple of years. And so part of it, the story of Joseph, and again, I won't go through the whole thing, obviously, again, but I just love those 2 words, but God, but God. What you intended for harm, brothers, what you intended for harm, God, but God. And if somebody could have been bitter, somebody could have been taking on the victim role, somebody could have, easily just lashed out in anger and all the bitterness and all of that, it could have been Joseph. He could have allowed his internal story to be negative. They didn't choose that. Somewhere along the line, away in jail, and again, all the time, somehow, some way, he told himself a different story. So when he came face to face to his brothers, it was, simply put, but God. God has been this. Doesn't mean God causes negative things. Something I want to show you. You can go a little deep dive, and those of you online, if you've got questions about some of this stuff, always feel free to email me. But once in a while, I hear things, and I sometimes sometimes just hear it and say no big deal. But other times I want to push back a little bit. You know what I'm saying? Like some people just believe a demon or spiritual warfare is behind everything. Rick, I couldn't make it to church today because my tire blew out, And gosh, spiritual, that demon, that tire got blown out. And I think to myself, this is what I really think to myself, okay? I think to myself, my gosh, what a poor demon, okay? If I'm taking somebody out, I'm taking the transmission out. I'm going to take the timing belt out. I'm going to, veer them off. I mean, come on, let's think about this. Oftentimes it's just life. It's just brokenness living in a broken world. Bad things happen in this world. It's not always, Satan or a demon. And so it's just part of living in a fallen world. You make decisions. I make decisions that impact and hurt others. Others will do that with you as well. So it's why in Romans 8 it says, but God uses all things for, anybody remember? Uses all things for good. It doesn't mean all things are good. And so I think as Christians, we need to be a little bit more astute and say, hey, there's some bad things out there. It's not my fault. It's not your fault. It's just part of life. Tires blow out. That's not an excuse I've heard. I'm just using it as an example, by the way. Okay, so that was week 1, okay? So to get us to week 2, and those of you online, I want you to also have a little discussion. Laura and Chloe, help the discussion on that too. But here's what you're going to do. I want you to think about, where is your little slice of heaven here on earth? Where do you have to go? Where do you like to go? Maybe it's in nature. It's a beach. Is it the mountains? Where do you like to go? Is it a certain cafe? Is it with certain kinds of coffee and people? But where do you go where that kind of just reminds you, it just kind of brings a little heaven to earth to you? And what you do is I want you to turn to the person next to you. And if you're alone, I'm going to ask you. Those of you who maybe go grab another person, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself. Just take 60, 90 seconds and talk about what it is for you and why it's a little bit of heaven to you. You all understand what I'm asking you to do? All right, ready, set, go. Do it. All right. Hey, so what is it? What is it for you? What is it for you? If you know me, you know a little bit about me. It's the beach. And that's a picture in Cancun. And I've always tried to get to the beach with my family or with my wife about once a year. It does something to me. It restores me. It gives me a chance. Something about waves, the peacefulness of waves and sand. I just love the sound. There's actually a view out my window a couple of years ago. I was laughing. Mary Schnabel goes here in the first service, and her father is a professor, and he wrote that book called The End Times. And I was reading that a couple of years ago, just some light reading. And anyhow, and of course, that's actually one of my favorite beaches in Florida. Marcy, you're talking about St. Petersburg. for me, that's Del Rey. Love Del Rey Beach, Siesta Key Beach. Whether I could afford it or not, we tried to always go. There's just something about great family time or just my time with Donna, my time with God, and that's it for me. And so, whatever it is, I think we also need to recognize that the heavens and the earth, there's aspects of God that we need to enjoy that. So the reason I bring this up, though, is because it kind of leads me to the story of kissing the wave. Kissing the wave. How in the world? I was born and raised in Chicago. I have lived down here pretty much the rest of my life, okay? How does a guy like me have that be heaven on earth? Because last time I checked, there's no beaches like that whatsoever, in Illinois. Well, I'm glad you asked, because here's how. The reality is, my mom, and Mom, if you're online, good morning, good to see you. She's right now just outside of West Palm Beach in a little place called Green Acres. If you're a little older like me, that's a show. There's a show with that, but that's a whole different story. I'm on a tangent. Come back to where I'm at, okay? Squirrel. The joys of being ADD. Anyhow, so I learned, because her whole family is from Massapequa Park, Amityville, Long Island, New York. And we would go out every summer to go visit the family. And she had brothers, there's 9 kids all together, and every year, 12 years of age, 13, 14, 15, 16, Matt, I would go to the beach, and I just fell in love. I fell in love with the beach. They taught me how to body surf. They taught me how to boogie board. They even taught me how to surf, okay? So here's a picture of me learning how to surf. Oh, you don't believe me? No. Nor should you. If you can't see it in the back, okay? There's things I won't bore you with how to surf, and I don't do it anymore because my body can't take it. But if you can't see in the back, that is a man on a surfboard. Okay, if you know anything about surfing, I'm actually wondering if this guy even survived that. He's ahead of it. It just depends on how far ahead and how fast the undertow is working him out there. But anyhow, I did have an experience like this. But for me, in Jones Beach in New York, it was nothing like this. I was learning how to surf, and a wave, actually it was really close to that size, hit me and took me down, okay? And I'm a pretty good swimmer, about 50 yards out from shore, and I didn't have anything, the board was not tied to my ankle, and it just wailed on me, okay? Mistake, wailed on me. So I start, if you know about salt water, by the way, it's really hard to open up your what? Your eyes. But I did really quick, and all you see is green and jellyfish or whatever, and I just start swimming, because you got to get, I'm not, a fish, I got to get to the, so I start swimming. Guess what I hit? The ground. I went the wrong way. Now, in that moment, panic starts to set in. I'm a decent swimmer. I wish I'm a pretty good swimmer. And I could hold my breath, back then pretty long. But at that point, panic. And so I remember I could still, and it's funny, you go through these kinds of things. And I remember just, turn around, go, use my feet, push up, and start swimming. I mean, there's air, I'm getting, and sure enough, I get to the top. And it's just one of those things. It's just, I've learned to respect the wave. And I've learned to respect the wave. The wave taught me something, okay? And that's part of what I want you to understand. This whole idea of kissing the wave. Now, where this phrase came from actually isn't from me. It actually came from an old pastor by the name of Charles Spurgeon. Anybody remember that name or have ever? Yeah, he's kind of known as the Prince of all preachers back in the 1800s. And he had a little phrase about, I've learned to kiss the wave that throws me against the rock of ages. Some of you maybe have heard that before. And he was incredible preacher, some of his books. But one of the things that Charles Spurgeon struggled with, anybody know? What did he struggle with? No, you guys don't know. Melancholy. Well, I would say today is clinical depression. Clinical depression, okay, what we understand it as today. Now, in part, where this came from, a lot of people don't know the story behind it, but the story of that whole kiss the wave was he was actually, at 22 years of age, became the teaching pastor of the largest church in the world at that time. Actually, London, Chloe and Kurt and Tawny, in London there. And it was called the Tabernacle Church. There was thousands of people long before the megachurch ever existed whatsoever. And he actually was teaching. I actually wrote this down because it was a day in October 19th, you guys, October 19th, 1856, a place in London called Surrey Gardens Music Hall. And it was like 5 or 6 stories, and there was 10,000 people. People were just filling to see this 22-year-old, to hear this 22-year-old preach. Unbelievable. But it was so crowded and overcrowded, and people were just jammed in. Of course, someone, this is how the story goes, someone yelled, fire. And there was the people who were trying to get in to hear him, and then there was people trying to get out, and as a result, the balcony collapsed, and as a result, 7 people died, and about 28 people were seriously injured. The story goes that for months, he couldn't teach again. For months, he would look at his Bible, and he would just cry. Clinically, we now know that he has post-traumatic stress. Matter of fact, I did some research, and he was 22 at the time. At the time of this tragedy, of this wave, if we want to call it this wave, he was 22. He was married for 11 months. Anybody here married? Anybody remember the transition to becoming married? Yeah. Wonderful, but not easy. And then the second thing is he had twins that were he was married for 11 months. The twins were 10 months old, just days old. If you go back on the social adjustment scale, this guy was off the charts. No wonder he struggled. But what I appreciate, and that's where I kind of get this term from, is this whole idea of kissing the wave. Kissing the wave. And Mark says it this way in his book. I love it. He says, you must learn to own the past, whatever it is, or it might own you. Now, some of you, you've already learned that. Some of us, we've kind of learned parts of this. You either own the past, or it might own you. That wave could swallow you up if you allow it. Now, a wave can be anything. A wave can be a broken relationship. A wave can be a job situation. A wave can be a diagnosis. A wave, there's so many layers to the waves. Now, you might not be responsible for all that's happened to you. I love this, though. This is great. You might not be responsible for all that's happened to you, but you are what? Responsible. It's the difference between the people who choose to get bitter versus the people who choose to get better. Spirituality, Christianity, walking in faith with Jesus, our goal, we should always be continually being transformed, renewing our minds daily, transformed by the renewing of our thinking and mind. The hard part is a lot of us, we've learned a lot of unhealthy skills like myself and coping mechanisms. That's why this series is so important for so many of us. When we find ourselves in difficult situations, we get so focused on getting out of them that we fail to get anything from them. That is the human tendency. Fight or what? Flight. Fight or flight. Whatever the wave is for you. And I want you to think about that for a moment. And there's nothing wrong with asking God to get you out of circumstances, to change even your circumstances. But the reality is, don't forget, his primary work in your life isn't about changing everything for you to make it better and easier. It's to actually change you, to help you become more, to help me become more like Jesus Christ, and to love more like Jesus Christ. And that's why it's so important to understand this habit of kissing the wave. And kissing the wave, and if you don't get anything from this talk, okay, I'll simplify as best as I can for you. This is the question you have to put in front of yourself each and every day, is what have you come to teach me? What have you come to teach me? Whatever difficulty, whatever problem, large as well as small. My wife and I don't know if Donnie's been watching. She was in LA. She had a late flight. She's on a 5-day trip right now. And we just always have good conversation. One of my commitments, and one of her commitments is to continue to grow in our marriage, is we're going to have at least one significant conversation, meaningful conversation. A lot of it's around faith and growing. And she just shared me a story yesterday. It was pretty difficult. That easily she could have been frustrated. She had every right to be frustrated, what the person did, what they said. But she didn't choose that. She chose, what can this teach me? That's kissing the wave. That's learning to kiss the wave. Now, to learn this, I want to go back to an old story in the Bible, a story of Peter. And we chose that picture for Peter. And if you know anything about Peter, I love Peter. I mean, he was just loud, boisterous. He was an 8 on the Enneagram, probably a DI on the disc. I mean, he just always said things and did things. And Peter, or Jesus finally say things like, get behind me, what, Satan, and things like that. Or he cut the ear off of the guard in the garden. He just, at times he just was just out there. And you love that, and it's difficult all at the same time. But there's a story in his life that I think is a story that illustrates about this kissing the wave. And I'll make a few observations, and I'll give you some homework, and then you can go home and watch the NFL playoffs, okay? Or enjoy this day. Jesus tells him this very now. I'm sorry, forgot to give my context. Real quick, the context, let me go back so you can't read ahead. Is the context is at the very end, Jesus is about to get arrested. He's in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's about to get arrested. And all that happens there. He's taken away, so forth and so on. It's his last time with his disciples. And Jesus says something that's provocative. It gets Peter's attention. And Peter just says the first thing that comes out of his mouth, okay? Some of you are like that. Some of you know people like that. Then Jesus told him, on this very night, you're all going to fall away on account of me. These are his disciples. These are the ones who are following him, ministering to him, seeing the miracles, and enjoying life with Jesus, communing and abiding with Jesus, all the miracles, all the things, all the difficult things. And he says, you guys are all going to fall away. You're all going to just basically run away this night. For it's written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. And he goes on to say, but after I have risen, I will go ahead of you back into my hometown area, most of your hometown area, Galilee, okay? And right away, immediately, it's like Peter responds, no. Hey, even if these other guys fall away, Jesus, I will never fall away. There's no way. I never will. Jesus answers, I'm going to tell you, Peter, this very night, this day, and he gets specific, before the rooster crows, you will betray me, you will disown me, not once, not twice, but three times, okay? And Peter comes right back at Jesus. I can picture, I always tell you, don't sanitize, don't romanticize. I see Peter getting in Jesus' face. If you know people like this, just get in your face. Even if I have to die with you, Jesus, I'll never do that. And all the other disciples follow us. Yeah, me too, you know. And it goes on. Now, Peter was sitting in the courtyard. Oh, so let me fast forward. So he says I'm never going to do this. Fast forward, Jesus is taken away. He is beaten. He is whipped. All that's going on, they scatter. A few of them, like Peter, tries to stay around and tries to watch what's happening because all of this is blowing their mind. They thought he was the Messiah. They thought he was going to be the one that was going to bring this kingdom back. They were thinking political. They were thinking army. They were thinking kingdom that way. In reality, his kingdom is not from this world. That's why be careful. Be careful, because a lot today and a lot in our tribe are trying to bring it back to political and in a kingdom like that, and that's not the kingdom. So now Peter's watching all this transpire. And that's where it picks up in verse 69. Now Peter was sitting out in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him. A servant girl. By the way, you can just read right past that. Wasn't a guard, wasn't another priest, wasn't another man. You can't get any lower on the totem pole than a girl and a slave girl. Kind of calls him out and says, hey, weren't you with that Jesus character? And he denied it before in front of everybody. He's like, no, hey, I don't even know the guy. What are you talking about? Then he goes to the gateway. So it's a little bit longer down the road. And another servant girl. Matthew's really calling him out. A servant girl. A little girl. This is Peter. I'll fight. I'm going to die to the end. Hey, that fellow was also with this Jesus from Galilee, from Nazareth, the town specifically, and he denied it again with an oath. I don't even know the man. You gotta be kidding me. After a little while, some others were standing there, went up to Peter and said, surely you are with one of them. Your accent gives it away. And he began to curse and say words that your mama and your daddy told you never say, because I'll wash your mouth out with soap kind of words, okay? I don't know the guy. Now, a very important thing here, I think for a couple of reasons, I'll only hold on one reason today. What happens? A rooster crows. Now, I'm a suburban guy, okay? I don't know much about roosters, but I was just trying to find out, and I have heard roosters. Actually, where I heard them when I was in Israel, and I was in Bethlehem, and I remember hearing roosters. I remember hearing some, roosters at that point in time when we were in a couple places in Israel. And all I remember is they're really, really loud and annoying, okay? They're really loud and annoying, okay? And when do rooster crows? When do they do it? At what? Sunset. Sunrise, right, okay? So now this is where I love where science kind of brings it also a little bit of a different light to it. All truth is God's truth. And so what do we know about conditioning? We all get conditioned to secondary things without even knowing it. How many of you go home, you won't admit this, but you go home and the first thing you do when you get home, you take your shoes off, whatever, and you open up the refrigerator, even though you're not even hungry. I've been conditioned to do that. I don't even, we've been conditioned. Certain things. Pavlov's dog. Remember your science class in high school? Pavlov's dog, to a bell, the dog began to salivate. Literally, that's kind of gets so many of you are conditioned to look at when you're bored. You're conditioned. You're hooked. Now here's the issue. This all went down, being all serious now. Every time Peter hears a rooster crow, you take a guess. What do you think he thinks of? Yeah. That he's a loser and a failure. he's a bum. He blew it. And there's no coming back. Those are my guesses. Because in some ways we've all been there. Different story, different context, obviously. We weren't there literally, but you all know when those things have happened. Or maybe you made some promises to Jesus or to somebody else, and you just blew it. And there's no excuse. Maybe you tried to rationalize it for a little bit, and and that's where those negative voices start kicking in. So important to change the story, which I'll get to in a little bit here. Because then Peter remembered those words. And he went outside, and he wept bitterly, just bitterly. Because he loved Jesus, of course he did. Sometimes we just do things out of fear, we do stupid things. I've done them out of fear, I've said things, done things. You have too, and this is a big deal, okay? And oftentimes you think of those things. Oftentimes online too, you the shame. You're upset with yourself. You might blame others at first, but then deep down, if you're one of those emotionally healthy type of individuals, emotional intelligence, you begin to realize, what did I do to contribute? So all of this, let me just ask you then, how do you kiss the wave? How do you take a wave? In this case, it's betrayal and all of that. I mean, waves can be, it can include, but it's so much more than that. How do you then kiss a wave? When bad things happen, when you do, or somebody does something bad to you, or negative things and pain and suffering and anxiety and uncertainty, how do you walk through that? Well, thankfully, his story doesn't end there. And thankfully, the scripture, not Matthew, but John actually continues the story. And I think it's one of those things that you can read and we can miss. And I love it. John 21. This is after his death, okay? This is probably weeks have gone by, and he's beginning to appear to his different disciples, including these guys before. This time they had gone back to Galilee. Anyhow, so afterwards Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. And it goes on this way, John writes. Simon Peter and Thomas, okay, Nathaniel, the sons of Zebedee, James and John, and two other disciples were all together. So oftentimes when you go through pain and suffering and there's a wave that hits and we're just kind of left blindsided and we're just kind of shaken, we're just numb, we're paralyzed, we just go back to what we know. So trauma does. For good, for better, for worse. And they were all in shock. But I think especially Peter. So finally Peter, and all of that pain, who knows? I mean, I can only go on human nature and what probably, in speculating what he's probably feeling, but I'm thinking he's feeling about this low, and he says, I'm just going to let the fish. By the way, what was Peter's vocation? Just bury myself in my work. I'll just go back and do what I know to do, whatever it is, just begins to happen. And they're like, you know what? What the heck? We're going to go with you. So they went out, they got in a boat, and that night they caught absolutely nothing. If you know anything about the story, there's something kind of, that didn't happen before, but anyhow, early in the morning, now I don't think it's by chance. When do roosters crow? Keep that in the back of your mind right now. His disciples did not realize it was Jesus, though. He just stood on the shore. Now, I've been there. The Sea of Galilee is beautiful. And it is beautiful. It's not huge, okay? So they're probably a couple hundred yards away. They see somebody and sure enough, this guy's calling out to them, hey, friends, haven't you any fish? And, he kind of asks them, they're like, it's kind of like if you're a Chargers fan, how did your Chargers do last night? You know what I'm saying? If you're a Packers fan, this is so hard for me to do, lie, sarcasm. I'm so sorry your team got eliminated last week. Did I even seem genuine? Is it a little bit? I'm a Bears fan. I'm a Bears fan. Everything is coming together for the Bears. I'm telling you, I've never been so excited about 3-14 team. I digress. Squirrel moment. Sorry. Let me get back to the passage. Friends, have you any fish? No. He says, hey, throw your net on the right side of the boat and you'll find some. When they did, they were unable to haul in the net because of the large number of fish. If you know, this happened previously. And it's kind of interesting. And I love, this is where the scripture, it's so fun sometimes. John is the one writing this. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved noticed it first and said to Peter, this is Jesus. And as soon, reactionary Peter, as soon as he put two and two together, because the one that Jesus loved saw it first, no competition here whatsoever, he takes out his coat, takes it off, okay, and he jumps into the water. I just love that. And the other disciples had to follow the boat because there was a large haul of fish, and those boats weren't very big. I've actually been in one that they've kind of made in the Sea of Galilee that's about the size. And if you've got a couple hundred fish, it's really loaded down. But when they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Jesus is making them a meal. He's actually communing with them. Very important. Bring some fish that you caught. Okay? So, Peter climbs back in the boat, drags it out ashore. It's full of all these fish. They get the fish out. Jesus says, now come and have breakfast. They broke bread, and none of the disciples asked because they all knew who this was, okay? Now, again, this is the part that's hard to understand, okay? Because my guess is, might even know you here or know you out there online, but none of us have seen someone die and come back to life, and now right in front of us making a meal like this, okay? And I think there's another piece of this too, is they all said they weren't going to deny him, and they all did deny him. So as he broke the bread, gave the fish, and he communed with them. Let me just grab two principles really quick out of this little passage, okay? First off, how do you kiss the wave? Where does this story, let me bring it all together as best as I can. I think first off, you have to just face your fear. You have to face your fear. Those guys didn't forget what they did to Jesus. Those guys didn't forget their denial. Peter, every day for weeks, was reminded when that rooster crowed, his failure, his lack of courage, his lack of faith, every single day. Those guys knew. And Jesus shows up. And they just faced their fear. They just simply, when a wave hits, you can deny it. You can try to skirt around it, okay? There's unhealthy things that you can do. Those of you who've been emotionally healthy spiritually, what we do around here to grow deeper discipleship, you know, you can deny it. You can try to skirt around it. But the reality is it does something inside of you that you have to appropriately deal with. So I didn't know that for years. I'm trained in this stuff. You got to face it and call it out for what it is. You got to face your fear. And I love the fact that they did that with Jesus. They didn't run away. They didn't, fight or flight. They didn't fight. They just went right to Jesus. Let me just ask you, right now, what is your fear? What is your current wave? Maybe it's another way of asking the question. Did a little research. We're only born with two fears. Humans are only born with two fears. The fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. Every other fear is conditioned and learned. Every other fear is conditioned and learned. Now, why do you share that, Rick? Because that just reminds me that every other fear can be unlearned. And faith is oftentimes about unlearning conditioned fear. That's why the Bible says it over and over. So do not, it's easier said than done. But this is one way. You just have to face it. I appreciate how Peter just jumps into the water, you know. I like the way Mark Batterson says it in his book. And this is a simple thing. The obstacle, okay, fight or flight, the obstacle for you and for me is oftentimes the way forward. But if you're going to deny it, if you're going to keep pursuing her, even though she says it's done, I'm over, your way forward is actually facing maybe your deepest fear of what it means to be alone. Your fear might be that of cancer. I know a few people in my circle. And you can deny it. And you can do all these, but at some point you got to face it. And how are you going to go after it and attack it? The obstacle often is the way forward. And you have to work through that fear. As soon as Simon Peter saw him, okay, he jumped into the water. Now, here's my recommendation. Don't go head first. Wade into it. You wade into your fear, your failure, your wave, whatever it is. I wrote it out this way. Pick any fear. The cure for fear of failure, by the way, is not success. The cure, whoops, I'm stuck on my chair. The cure for fear of failure is not success. The cure for the fear of failure is actually failure. Failure in small doses will build an immunity to fear. So you identify your fear, like rejection of intimacy, maybe it's the future, uncertain in social situations, relationships. You've got to face it. Before you face it, you've got to identify it. And then you just wade into the water. You just start going slow. If you're fearful of taking, some of you young infants, I've seen some young infants and toddlers, it's hard to go to the store if you've got a screaming child. What do? You don't go all at once. You'll do your big food shopping all at once because of your fear, this wave, this anxiety. You take a little bit of time, you do a few things, and you begin to, it's not usually the issue of the toddler or the baby, it's your issue of fear. It's a fear of, this whole idea of a relationship or a conflict in your marriage. I was horrible the first few years of my married life. I thought married life, it was happily ever after. And she loved me and I loved her. And you live with each other. And guess what? She had the audacity to point out, I have faults. I know it's hard to believe, but I do. And I would flee. Because I never learned in my home, in my family of origin, how to deal with conflict in a healthy way. So jumping head first is Peter. And some of us might do that. I know people like that too. But that's how you face your fear, just a little bit of time. The other observation I have there is that simply put, that fear, if it's in your spiritual realm with God, they failed and they failed immensely. And yet Jesus still communes with them and the rest of the disciples. That's the whole of the communion, of the fish and the bread, and breaking bread together and having a meal together. And I think of that verse, that 1 John verse in 4, I think it's 18a, there is no fear in love, but perfect love, agape love, drives out fear. So here's my little thing. Let me just write this down. It'll be in the notes if you want to, because I'm going to give you work on this week. Last week it was to work on what part of your story do you want to change? What part of your story do you want to change? You start looking at that every day, what's the fear? What's part of your past? Last week, a little bit, what's part of your past that maybe has made you who you are today? I'll try to bring us all together throughout this series. But today is a little bit, what's your wave? Or what's your wave? Some of you, Rick, wave? How about multiple waves? And I'm sorry. At times it seems like it comes in threes, that little saying. But what is it specifically? Don't just fear the wave. You have to go a layer deeper and go, what is the fear about that wave? What's the fear about that wave? What's underneath it? I've learned that is so important. Okay, so face your fear. Number 2, I'll get through these quickly. Remember, Jesus always pursues you. It's kind of obvious, isn't it? But is it? There are times I have felt like God is really distant. That's a scary thing for a pastor to say. But the truth be told, if more of us would be more, transparent, is it happens because I'm just a human being and just a person trying to journey in his faith like anybody else. And there's times it seems like he was distant. And there was times it seems like, maybe he had given up on me. Maybe, all the, whatever is gone. There's times like that in life. What I've come to learn is it's really not anything about me. It's part of being human. It's part of all of our journey. The ups and the downs and the hard times and the joys. And that's just part of the journey. It's why I love Lord of the Rings more than ever. Because I get it now what he was trying to get to. It's a beautiful picture. Throw in some battles. I love it. But remember that Jesus always pursues you, church. And I love it because part of my question to the passage is, when does Jesus show up? When does Jesus show up? They're just fishing in the ordinary. They're just doing their life. They even went back to things, their old ways. They even went back in their old ways of doing things. Maybe they just kind of buried themselves in the Word. And there's another picture for you, another picture in the Gospels that Jesus always pursues you. And that oftentimes the question is, will I have the eyes to see it? That's why I love that question. And I mentor some guys on Saturday mornings, and I used to call them a young men's group. They're in their 30s and 40s. I guess I'm the old guy now. But the question we asked throughout Advent was, where have you seen Jesus? By the way, it's a great way to end your day. Is ask yourself the question, where have I seen Jesus today? You know what that does to you? It's a great habit, by the way, to win the day, is you begin to see things from a more positive perspective. You begin to see your blessings and gratitude. It could be a conversation at the gym. It could be just some time at home and just watching your granddaughter bond with her parents deeper and deeper. And you sit back and you think to yourself, you know what, this is really good. It's tough. I have to become less, but they have to become more. But to see that, there's Jesus in that. To see Jesus moving in my life or in this church's life, not because numbers are growing and all these different things, but because people are starting to experience some real life, deep, deep transformation. Where people are starting to ask difficult questions. In the ordinary, in conversations, in homes like the video over pasta with some Muslim friends, because simply they might have faced a fear of those people are different from me, but you just begin to get to know them. And Jesus shows up in the ordinary. And again, when waves hit us, when they hit us, we tend to panic. I get it. I do too. We even tend to distract ourselves with unhealthy and healthy coping mechanisms. But that's where it's but God. But God, he still pursues. And so maybe you're far off over here. Maybe it's been a long time since you've been here, or you felt close to God, whatever it is. And you might not feel it. It's not always about feelings. But the reality is he will always, always, always pursue you. Just like he did his people on that beach on the Sea of Galilee. And what I'm learning in my own walk is so much of God is being with God, is recognizing God in the ordinary. We are always looking for the supernatural. We are always looking for the miracle. For him to do his work, we have to join him in the ordinary and the normal. And it starts by just seeing him in the everyday moments of life. And these are the moments, I'm convinced these are the moments that when we discover who God truly is and then who we are. And in that moment, on that beach, over that fire, I do not suggest fish for breakfast, okay? So we'll contextualize it over your everything bagel from Einstein's and your chive cream cheese, okay? Your cup of coffee, your $30 cup of coffee from Starbucks, whatever it is for you, okay? Who's the judge? Whatever, you know. I love coffee. In the simple things, in the ordinary things, we discover. And that's why I love this little phrase is, if you want God to do the super, you have got to do the natural. And that's just simply, God will meet you in the ordinary. God will meet you. Look, where is God? Where is Jesus today? And I'm telling you, it's part of it's kind of changed the way I'm thinking and living. So number 3, I got to go through this quickly. Unleashing the power. I'm sorry, it's longer than I'd like to. And as a pastor, you try to get into a nice little clean formula or a nice little smooth thing. Sometimes it just doesn't happen, okay? But part of it, if you want the power of winning the day, it starts with this, receiving his love and his grace. Receiving his love. Start your day with receiving his love and his grace. So many of you, like myself, just start the day off running to the job, to the gym. I know there's, some of you parents, it's such a hard thing. The baby wakes up. And my son Ben, when he was, he's a little toddler, he'd wake up at 5 a.m. no matter what we did. 5 a.m. But start your day with receiving his love and grace. Why do I say this? I love this because it's a picture of this here. As the story goes on. When they finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Okay? Do you love me more than these guys? Do you love me more than these fish, these boats, all this life? Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. I love you. I love you. Then you feed my sheep. You feed my sheep. Again, Jesus said, Simon, he took him off to the side. Do you love me? He answered, yes, Lord. Yes, I love you. Well, then you take care of my sheep. A third time. Why is this so important? How many times did Jesus deny him? Or Peter deny Jesus? 3. It's not by chance. Jesus is masterful here. 3 times he reinstates him. So much so, I don't know if Peter got it first. He was so hurt because he kept on asking him a third time, but Jesus had to. Because in his mind, denial 3 times. Oh, by the way, when is all this happening? What did the passage say? Early in the... When do roosters crow? I wonder. Here's one of my little thoughts. I wonder. For all those weeks, all those days, he heard the rooster crow. And he thought all the negative thoughts about himself, and the rest of them did too. I don't think it's by chance. I think it's a full circle moment. That when he heard the rooster, he was now able to think of the love and the grace and the power of that in his daily life. It's a full circle moment. And in that moment of Jesus communing with the disciples and Peter, calling Peter to the side and saying, I love you, now feed my sheep, yes, you love me, reaffirming, yes, you love me, yes, you love me, even with your past, no matter what's gone on, I'm with you. With one act of grace, Peter changed his story. He flipped the script. And with one act of grace, Peter kissed the wave. Rick, how do you know that? Because who was the first leader of the early church? Peter. And somehow, maybe that rooster, every time it crowed, he taught himself a different story. And even though it was an awful, awful wave that hit him, and every time the rooster crowed, it would remind him of his failure and his ineptness. Now, every time he heard a rooster, he remembered that little moment with Jesus on the shore of Galilee of love and acceptance and grace. Even in spite of, I love you, I'm with you. You unleash the power of your day by starting to receive his love and his grace on a daily basis. And how do I also know that? Peter wrote something. And with that in mind, the context, when I look at these words written years later by Peter, when he was writing to the early church, he said, the God of all what? It's not because he read a theology book, not because he heard it from some pastor, some theologian. It's because he himself received it. The God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, after you've suffered a little while, will himself restore you, Sea of Galilee, and make you strong, firm, and steadfast. That's how you kiss the wave. I think of a verse I learned a long time ago, and that is the Lord's great love. Because of the Lord's great love, we're not consumed. His compassions never fail, for they are new, and there it is again, every single morning. For great is your faithfulness. And so here's what I want you to do. What holds you back? Here's the habit I think that has really formed in me over these last few years. And I don't have the time to expand all of it. I'll try to bring more of it up throughout this series. But let me ask you, how do you start your day? And do you sit and receive the love and the grace of Jesus as the first part of your day? And if you don't, I'm not bringing this up to guilt. If you know me, guilt doesn't work. Guilt is not a motivator for any of us. It's certainly not for me. It's got to be a second change, cybernetic change. It's got to be because of who I want to become. And if you want to grow more in love and be more connected to Jesus, and you want to be a better husband, better wife, more connected to God, so that you can live out in your parenting or your grandparenting or your neighbors, and you want to love people better, love Lord your God, their whole heart, soul, and mind, and strength, and love your neighbor like yourself. If you want to do that, there's no way you do that. There's no way I do that apart from being connected to the vine. I think Peter learned that. And I can tell you, I've learned that. I haven't always done that well. But I've learned this. In my habits of my own life, I've learned that when I do it enough times, I don't even have to think about it. Now, every morning, the alarm goes off at 5:45. Transparency. I hit snooze at least once. I go down, I make my coffee, and by 6:15, I'm in a certain spot. I'm not saying this because, look at me. That's not at all what I'm saying. I am saying I've tried to do far too much in my life for God, for ministry and family, and I have a long way to go. And I've never understood this concept. Part of it is I'm a paid professional Christian, so I'm paid to study and teach the word and all these different things. And a lot of that I've been I'll share this with you, Omar, and other people on staff. Is it has to? I really see it now, not a legalistic, fundamental way, but it has to be separate. You as a child of God, just receiving and being in His presence through silence and contemplation and journaling and in the Word and praying and singing is separate. And you receive it every morning. That's how you kiss the wave. That's how you begin to develop a but God moment in your life. And when the bad things happen, you're not shaken. Yeah, you're going to be shaken. Yeah, a wave hits and it's hard and it's scary and you're human. But God. So let me do two things and I'll get you out of here. What is your wave? And I'm telling you, I wish I could teach more on this. The obstacle, whatever your wave is the way forward. And I can tell you story after story about myself in this. Actually, I will. Because I'm up here and you're down there, or you're online. I just posted something. I have, for the first time in the last month, I'm even hesitant to share this. I am actually about pain-free. 20 months, I have been in constant pain. I've got a couple things wrong with me, okay, besides my head. The things I have wrong with me is I have herniated disc. One is pretty severe. I learned that in May and June of last year, or excuse me, 2021. And there was all different kinds of solutions that was put before me, but the best one is they said physical therapy. Because to be honest, surgery, I wasn't ready to hear that, and I wasn't ready for that. But he told me, you're going to have to really work on this hard. And I had not really talked a lot about this, but I go to the gym now pretty much 6 days a week, don't I, Matt? And it's not because I'm all, I do, yes, I work out, yes, I'm learning, because I'm trying to strengthen everything down here, because I am messed up more than I thought I was messed up. I've got scoliosis, I've got twisting of the spine, which has actually created a situation where one leg, we all have one leg a little higher than the other, but mine's so significant. As a matter of fact, what could have actually taken care of all of this was a little foot insert all those years ago. We didn't know I had it. I played basketball full court till I was 47, played baseball then softball till just a couple of years ago, and my hip is messed up. My knee has had surgery once. I have about only 10% of my cartilage left over. It's all connected, okay? I'm so arthritic that my doctor, Dr. Lee at the time, a couple of years ago in the MRI said, Rick, you have the knee of an 80-year-old. You have the mind of a 10-year-old, but you have the knee of an 80-year-old. He didn't say that. I'm like, I feel it. In the cortisone shots I get, I have one more little surgery I'm supposed to do, and then it'll be knee replacement. And again, and some of you far worse, okay? But I'm saying this because the way forward for me to kiss the wave is I could have, and I did. I could have sat and moaned and groaned, and I probably did my fair share, Abby. Moaning and groaning. I had to lay on this way. I had to do all my reading in the cobra position, all these different things. But at some point I learned, kiss the wave. It's my way forward. What can you teach me? I have learned so much by being in pain. I'm far more, I have ways to go, being in tune to others' pain now. I've learned so much from those moments, and just now I craft out that 90 minutes. And I know some of you, 90 minutes. Some of you, it has to be, maybe it can only be 10 or 15 or 20 minutes in the morning. But some of you, you are just, you're full of excuses. And it's up to you. It's your choice. I won't go back. What have you come to teach me? Man, I have a list. And so the other question is kind of where I'm getting to, but in my moment, I lost my clicker, is how can you start daily? How can you do it differently? I want to encourage you. That's what I want you to encourage you. So let me just, I know it's that time. I got to get you out of here. We got a guest lunch we got to get to at noon. And if you're newer here to E-Free, and you didn't even plan on coming, we got some food. You can stay. We don't go nearly as long as the pastor goes long in a message, okay? But if you want to learn a little more about us, we'd love to just have some food with you, sit down, learn a little bit about you is really one of my main goals. I'd love to have you, okay, right after this. But I want to give you a gift. Okay, here's the gift. Because so many of us teachers, we teach and then go. I want to give you 90 seconds to think about this. Write these things down in your notes, in your phone if you have to. But just what are those questions again? How can you start your day off differently? How can you start your day off differently? And maybe, just maybe, what's the obstacle? What's the wave? And possibly start thinking about what it can teach you. So just bow your heads for a second. Just kind of close your eyes. Brandon, if you got a little music real quick. I'll dismiss you afterwards. But I don't want you to leave your day without taking a moment and thinking about this on a serious basis. here's where I feel led. Keep your eyes closed. If you've got a wave or you got some waves that have hit and it's overwhelming or it just has you right now, would you please stand? Would you please stand? Just something about identifying it. Just even recognizing it is what it is. Good. Anybody else? I don't know the answer or what will it teach you. I know that's the starting place. I want to pray for all of you, especially those who are standing. Heavenly Father, would you all stand now? Please stand for closing prayer. Heavenly Father, we know that in all seriousness, waves, they come and they go. Some are small, some are medium, and then some are really big. And we're human, and you know that. You are our high priest, the scripture teaches, that knows all about us. You're one of us. You became one of us. Not only to save us, but I think that you fully can relate to us. That's why we can always go to you. And so in our fear, and our anger, and our denial, or whatever it is, I just pray that we lay this before you. I know there's a few in my life too. So it just starts by acknowledging it, facing it. I pray that you would remind us all that you will pursue us. Maybe we're not in a time of waves right now to kiss the wave, but as I've always say around here, I praise God for that for you, but be prepared, it's coming. And in those times, and in the times that those of you right now in waves, and even online, that you remember today that Jesus is always pursuing. He always just wants to be with you. He wants to commune with you, like on that beach with Galilee. Doesn't mean all pain and suffering is going to go away. It just means that somehow, some way, he is going to be there with you. He'll never leave you nor forsake you. And then if you have the power, if you have the audacity to ask the question, what are you trying to teach me? I think Peter learned more humility. I think Peter learned more empathy. And that's why he wrote so much about grace and your agape love. And I pray that you would, Father, do a great work in all of us for your glory. And then, Lord, I lastly pray that somehow it starts, and I didn't do a great job of doing this, but it starts with the day. Teach us to number our days and to use our days wisely. And the greatest gift that we've been given is a relationship with you. And I just think there's something about starting the day off with you. To receive your incredible love and grace that does something to us. It shouldn't surprise us. John 15 teaches that you are the vine, we're the branches. We can do nothing apart from you. So I just want to pray. I'll talk more about this. But even this week, I'll even talk more about this this week, about how to abide, to kiss the wave. We pray this in Jesus' name. The whole church said,